Welcome back to the Bible in Context.
Where context is king and the original author's intent drives our interpretation.
It's good to be back.
Yes, it is good to be back. It seems like it's been forever.
I know we haven't actually sat down and recorded these in a while, especially since we're doing every other week now.
Yeah. Seems like it's been a few months.
It may have been. I don't know.
Well, I think we sat down once and maybe got through one. Oh, no. Last time we did it was...
Yeah, you were gone last time.
Yeah, I was gone last time. And then the last time it was at the White Flag Shelter in the middle of the night.
That's right.
We tried to record and
we got through one.
We got through one, and our brain stopped working at that point because it was like...
It was like 4 a.m.
Yeah. So, yeah. so we punted it, and yeah, that's right.
Well,
so, yeah.
With that, I mean, we are... If we're recording at 4 a.m., we are at desperation for time constraints.
Yes. So. Yeah. So it is good to be here.
It is.
Back at the library, and it's actually not raining today. It's sunny and nice, which is unusual for us when we get together.
Yeah. It's been actually raining all week, and it's actually a sunny day.
I know. It's very odd. So we'll take it, though.
Okay, so since you were gone last time, you have some thoughts on how Paul handles the issues between men and women in a marriage context here. So what input do you... What are you going to add? What are you going to disagree with? We're going to debate here.
Yeah, I don't know that I'm going to necessarily disagree. I think that first of all, I'm bummed that I missed the last recording because it's an important discussion, and I recognize that we're probably not going to answer every question in a single podcast or even a couple of podcasts. I mean, numerous books have been and dissertations have been written on this subject of the role of husbands and wives. So I figured I'd add my 2 cents. And one of the things I wanted to say is that I think that often the terms egalitarian and complementarian are loaded terms. And it's because those who identify with one of those camps, I think they often assume that all those in the other camp are extremists. And so, for example, it seems often that those in the egalitarian camp assume that those in the complementarian camp believe that men are superior and women are subservient, and so women should have really no voice, no rights, because they're physically, emotionally, and intellectually weaker than men. That's the assumption that egalitarians make about complementarians. And on the flip side of that, it seems often that those in the complementarian camp assume that those in the egalitarian camp really just see no difference between men and women at all. That and often I think the assumption is that egalitarians are totally against traditional gender roles. And so, for example, they must believe that it's just sinful for a woman to desire to stay home and just be a mom.
You kind of also get the poles of whichever camp you fall in must also determine your political leanings,
yes,
and also your what was I going for here?
Well, just how conservative you are and the way you approach the Bible. Like,
right.
I mean, do you really believe the Bible?
And how moral are you? All those
right,
all those issues.
Right.
You just attach the poles to each view.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just not the case at all. If you actually take a look at this in scholarship, there are people across the board who debate this.
Yeah, and there very much is a spectrum within both camps. And typically, like, I try to avoid extremes just in general. And I think there is a healthy balance in the middle with this issue. And I appreciated how you pointed out that in Ephesians 5:21, this is the introduction of this whole next section, and really the thesis of what Paul's trying to get at. Verse 21 is submitting to one another out of reverence for Christ. And then you've got examples. Okay, how does a husband submit to his wife, and how does a wife submit to her husband? And goes on to talk about slaves and masters, and then we're going to talk about today children and parents, and so it goes on and on. What I see here is this idea of, okay, Paul sees a mutual submission between the husband and wife, and it does seem that the way Paul envisions that submission, the way that it's going to play out, I think allows for some differences in the roles of husbands and wives that complement one another. Now, I think Paul is maybe intentionally vague here because I think, every relationship is different and contexts are different. And so I don't think Paul gives us a whole lot of specifics of what this mutual submission should look like, actually. But instead what he does, I think, is give us some healthy principles. And so, one, marriage is meant to reflect the relationship between Christ and the church, which you mentioned. And then, so what does that look like? For a husband, it looks like that they are to submit to their wives by sacrificially loving them as Christ loved the church. And then for wives, I think it means that they submit to their husbands by honoring them or showing respect to them as the church honors and respects Christ. And so I think Paul summarizes that in verse 33, where he says, however, let each one of you love his wife as himself, and let the wife see that she respects her husband. And so I can't remember if you mentioned this, but that the word respect there in the Greek, it's
fear.
Yeah, it's phobia. But it's the same word that's used up in verse 21, where we read submit to one another out of reverence. That word reverence is the same root word.
Yeah, and we've talked about this before on the podcast. There's an article I actually cited in my book called Ancient Travelers, Intercultural Contact and the Fear of the Gods. And you find language of the fear of the gods, or just fear across kind of the ancient Mediterranean, refers to is taking someone's word with gravity, respecting it. And so in these cultures, the word fear, especially in reference to authority, it can mean fear, but it can also refer to taking their word with gravity, taking them seriously, respecting what they say.
Yeah. And so it's this idea of being respectful of the relationship and honoring. It's that honor-shame kind of culture that we've talked about a lot. And I think understanding that, though, it's not this kind of fear where you're like trembling, afraid of your husband, but it's a desire to respect them and honor them. And so I think Paul is saying that like a wife should have a healthy reverence towards their husbands. I know personally, and this is where you might push back or disagree with me a little bit, but I do think that the basic principles here are probably meant to go beyond Paul's immediate culture. And I mean, I think it's wise for us to consider Paul's context and his culture here, but then figure out how do we apply the principles to our own culture and our own context. So those are my 2 cents.
Cool. Yeah, no, I wish you were here last time because I wanted to kind of hash it out. I wanted to see where we were going to go and where we would land on kind of having that discussion live back and forth. But no, I'm glad to get your thoughts, especially because I think you look at this with a more pastoral eye. There's a lot more to think about when you think about how to apply this in a marriage, whichever view you take. I mean, that's a whole different argument than just trying to figure out what Paul's talking about sometimes.
Yeah. So in summary, I mean, I think that it's much more nuanced than any of the extremes that we have. But I personally, I do think there are some principles that Paul is laying out there that apply very much to his culture, but we can still learn from. And I think at the end of the day, I think no matter what culture you're in, the marriage relationship is meant to be a reflection of Christ and the church.
So as we leave the section on husbands and wives, the next sections, they're not as big of a debate because so far whether you're in this culture or in a different culture, they kind of apply the same. There's no cultural issues that divide the fact that, children have to answer to parents. That's true in every culture because they're younger and learning. Slaves and masters, that's also the same in every culture. So we'll continue on with chapter 6, verse 1, and talk about how Paul begins to flesh out this mutual submission in the context of other difficult and common relationships that you might find in a church family setting. So the first one, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. And this is the first one with a promise. What is the promise that children receive for obedience to their parents, Nate?
Happy and long life, I think, isn't it?
That's exactly it, yeah. Live long and prosper.
Live long and prosper.
That's terrible. I shouldn't have said that. No, so that it may go well with you and that you may live long in the land. Mm-hmm. So, okay, what land?
The promised land.
Not just in general?
Yeah, no, I think this is...
It's not America?
No, I think he's referring back to the Old Testament and the covenant promises.
Yeah, and so did Israel live long in the land?
They did not.
No, what happened to them?
They did not listen to their mom and dad.
Yeah, exactly. And ideally, the parents, they are doing Deuteronomy 6. They are teaching the Torah to their children. They are upholding the values of the Torah. They are honoring Yahweh in the instructions and the way they teach their kids. And so their kids will listen to that, and they are then honoring Yahweh. They're upholding the covenant they have with him. And the covenant is also tied to their dwelling in the land. If they do not uphold the covenant, they don't honor Yahweh and show the world who he is, and they show a bad version of Yahweh to the world because they are his priests, they are his representatives, then he's going to exile them from the land. And so this promise is about, hey, listen to your God-fearing parents because our covenant will be upheld and you'll live long in the land of Canaan that I gave to you. Israel.
Yeah. So this assumes that the parents are very much loyal to Yahweh and want to remain faithful to the covenant. And so I think that's part of the mutual submission. And we're going to go into the parents more specifically with the fathers, like how they need to, in a sense, submit to their own children.
Yeah, and as far as their role allows them to do. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Real quick though, this is not a health, wealth, prosperity kind of thing. It's not even a promise that you will have a long life if you were obedient to your parents as a kid.
Right.
So we've said what it's not. What is it doing here? Why does Paul bring this up?
These are household rules. He's trying to help unity within the church. And so what does that look like within the immediate family?
I think part of what he's doing is, so this is the first promise that Paul sees that says, hey, this one is actually tied to the longevity of our covenant. And so he's just pointing out the importance here, and he's saying, by the way, in the same way that Israel was exiled because of their lack of faithfulness, so you too could be cut off from the covenants and the promises, the family of God, and so on, if you are acting in the same way. Right. If you are being rebellious from God-fearing parents. The idea, this is all in the context of church, not just, Greek Zeus worshiping parents. Like in that respect, a kid should disrespect his parents and say, no, I'm going to worship Jesus, not Zeus.
Right. Or in our context, I think a lot of people may take this passage out of context and basically tell their children, look, you need to obey me or your life is going to be miserable. Even if I'm telling you things that are totally ungodly. You need to do what I say you to do no matter what, even if that means that we never go to church, we're never connected to anything of our faith. And so, I think it's important that phrase, live long in the land, is so important because it very much implies that the parents are very much faithful followers of Christ. Yeah,
there's assumptions and background behind this that Paul is just using to make his point all that more pronounced that, hey, this isn't just about, be good for mom and dad. This is also part of falling into the value system of the Bible and a way that parents are led in Christ and away from rebellion to him by their parents. So Paul could have stopped right there, and that'd be, good enough in this culture because, similar to the instructions given to men and women, he could have given a few instructions that were culturally aligned and moved on. In this culture, fathers, they have absolute authority, so Paul just could have said, hey, kids, listen to your parents, and then move on. Instead, he turns around and now says something to the fathers.
Yeah, he says, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and the instruction of the Lord.
Yeah, and so he gives this instruction to, as you are disciplining them, especially in this culture, it could be to whatever extent the father thought was appropriate. And notice here he picks on the fathers, not the mothers, because they were the ones who had the absolute authority in this culture to do that. So they're the ones that need to be addressed. And so he says, bring them up according to the truths of Jesus, of him as king, and also don't provoke them to anger. Don't make it essentially too harsh and alienate them through the way you discipline. Do it with a gracefulness and in a way that actually cares about the way that is bringing them up in the instruction of the Lord.
Right. Yeah, I think this passage is very applicable to, especially if you're a father. It's important that we treat our kids with the respect we want from them, and that, we should expect them to be obedient and be respectful, but we need to be mindful of their age too, that sometimes, and this is something I'm still learning as a father, sometimes their bad actions aren't simply because they're being rebellious, but it's because they're having a hard time figuring out how to navigate certain things, and it's frustrating to them, and so they act out in ways that we don't like.
Yeah.
And so having the right perspective.
The ideal of discipline is it's restorative.
Yes.
It's to bring them back to whatever broken family relationship is at play, whatever the problem may be. And so we want to be tactful in the way that we discipline children so that they're not further alienated from the family needlessly, but rather it's teaching them something about the goodness of, again, the values of Scripture and of God's kingdom and his people.
Yeah. And I believe the words discipline and instruction could be translated as educate and admonish, which has a little bit of a different tone to it, I think.
Yeah, the word for discipline there, which again, we do read a lot of connotations, usually harsh connotations into that word, but the word is also, it could be translated training. training them up. And so this is more of a, that when Paul is saying discipline here, I think he has an educational focus. So in this we see children being submissive to their parents by honoring and listening to them, assuming they are God-fearing parents and are leading them to the Lord. And if they're not, honoring them in as far as they can, as long as they're honoring the Lord. And then parents being mutually submissive to their children by disciplining them in a way that is a service to them, not in a way that is just, you've ticked me off, get out of my face, get out of my way, you're a problem.
Right.
And again, what does that do functionally? It brings unity.
Absolutely.
That's what Paul is doing. He's trying to say serve one another because that's going to be part of the church being a unified whole. That's what he's been gunning for this entire letter.
Yeah. My wife and I use the phrase, and I can't remember where we heard it first, but we use it all the time. We need to connect before we correct with our kids. And they when we do that, they can handle the discipline a whole lot better.
That's good. Okay, then Paul moves on to another difficult relationship, and that is bondservants, or some translations will have slaves, and masters. So, okay, let's step back again, and I know that we've kind of covered this before, but maybe we just need to nuance this once again, because anytime this topic comes up, it's just a difficult topic. So slaves and masters in Greek culture, it could be a very bad slave-master relationship, oppressive, abusive, whatever, or it could also be a very beneficial relationship. You even have slaves that are very well respected and have some social honor because they hold high positions. And those occurrences of someone who is a slave, it's more like a full-time employment relationship. And that's kind of the ideal of what you want. And that's what Paul, I think, rather than saying, let's dissolve this cultural construct, because I think he knows like they're in the Roman Empire. As long as they're in Rome, that's probably not going to happen. And so instead he's saying, let's show everyone how this can be a good thing. Because also there is the aspect of, well, if you dissolve the slave-master relationship, anytime someone comes into the church, what you might come away with is now the slave no longer has someone providing for them, and so they're kind of left out on their own. They actually kind of need that master. And in some places we saw with Philemon, Paul actually tells Philemon to welcome Onesimus, his slave, back as a brother. And so you do get kind of this elevation of status out of just an object as a slave. This kind of does become more of an employment ideal relationship.
Right. Yeah, this was one of their foundational systems.
Right.
It helped care for people and keep them alive.
Right.
And so there wasn't, and maybe it wasn't the ideal system, but it was so foundational to their culture that it wasn't going to be an easy change.
Yeah.
It'd be similar in my mind to like the public school system here in America. It may not be the best system, but to just like erase the public school system right now, can you imagine the chaos that would happen?
Yeah.
And so I could see Paul in a letter to us today, maybe talking about teachers and students. Like this is how you need to interact. And he's not going to say get rid of the whole system, but within that system, this is the best way that we can have unity within the church.
Even in America, I mean, most of us, we are, enslaved to banks.
Yeah.
Because we all owe a mortgage or student debt or car loans, whatever it is, and you have to work or else they're going to repossess your house and you're going to be hungry. So it's very similar in that respect. It's a different story for the bad, abusive scenarios, but I think Paul, he's undermining that and turning it into a good thing that we're all kind of used to, which is kind of an employment scenario where the lesser is being cared for and the greater is caring for his servants as people.
Right.
And fellow brothers and sisters. And so with that being said, so he says, bondservants, obey your earthly masters with fear and trembling, with a sincere heart as you would Christ, not by the way of eye service as people pleasers, but as bondservants of Christ, doing the will of God from the heart, rendering service with a good will as to the Lord and not to man. And so he keeps going, and it's interesting here that he has this more extended section, just like he does for the children. So he talks to the lesser for longer in these last two encouragements. And again, even with, I mentioned this in the last episode, but even slavery, if you are a servant or an employee or a slave, that does not mean that your honor, your makeup is less than someone else. This is just a cultural position that you are stuck in, but yet he still uses the church metaphor to describe the way that we are to serve one another in this scenario. He finds a way to take the ideal relationship of church and Christ and put it on here because Christ's relationship to the church is the absolute ideal relationship. And so he'll find a way to fit all the relationships he's talking about into that model.
So every relationship at the end of the day is meant to be a reflection of Christ and the church.
Yeah, in some way, shape, or form, yeah. Because there's different aspects of that relationship, so which one applies to the way we should interact over here and over here.
Right. That's good.
And then likewise, masters, they had in this culture a lot more authority than our bosses. There was no better business bureau or anything like that. So
he's very straightforward with them. Stop your threatening.
Right.
Stop it.
Yeah. Because that was very, very common. And so just like the fathers, he encourages them, don't be harsh, but remember that they are your brother. Right. Remember that your master and his master is in heaven. You guys are equals.
Yeah.
Because in this culture, honor is a big deal. We've talked about that a lot. And the master has a lot more honor than the slave. And Paul's just reminding them, this is not our kingdom. The value system of this world is not the one of God's kingdom, where you guys are on a blank slate. And so how about you guys, instead of lording things over each other or serving each other out of malice, love each other by being a good master and serving that good master well, so that it's mutually beneficial, mutually loving, mutually submissive. So all throughout this section, Paul is taking these difficult relationships, as we've said, that you find in this culture that can cause problems in the church, and showing how do we serve one another in these.
How can we be united within these specific relationships?
Yeah, this entire letter circles around church unity. Now that he's shown that Jews and Gentiles are part of the same family, how do we continue doing that in the Jew-Gentile relationship and in some other typical relationships you'll find in the church? So in the next episode, we will finish out with the whole armor of God and finish out the book of Ephesians.